for the kids. Sorry, I know it's the newer toys on the line, but
All right, I've got the recording running. We're up and ready to go. Looks like we've got a pretty good group of folks on the line already. I think we can just get started. All right, welcome everybody. Tonight's topic was set up by Mohammed, who's a mentor on 2052. Mohammed unfortunately found out a couple hours ago that he's got a family member in the hospital. So the other mentors and captains and students who have been on the drive team from KnightKrawler are going to pick up the slack and try to carry the conversation tonight. Does anyone, before we get started, does anyone have any kind of updates or news they want to share about how the season's going for them, or anything of relevance that they want to share out with the group? Anybody have any needs, something they're struggling to get besides notes? I mean, if you guys want to have an online auction for selling off notes, we could do that, I guess. I have an announcement. If you are interested in attending KnightKrawler's Week 0 event, there are 8 spots left.
How much are those?
The registration fee for our Week 0 is $175 or $165 if you bring a t-shirt.
If you bring a note
in the raffle. Yeah, if you bring a note.
If you bring a note.
We expect you to bring notes because we don't have enough notes to run the whole tournament. Anybody else have any things they want to share before we get started with the driver topic?
We got a lot of flu going on. I think you may see half of my kids this weekend. So something to be mindful of that. When we have kids that just push because you never know who's going to have the stomach bug that's going around.
Yeah, this time of year it's easy to get sick. All right, well, not hearing anything else, let's roll. We had this conversation, we talked about driver selection, I think it was last March or maybe even April, as part of a larger conversation around structure. And we talked a fair bit about driver selection at that time. And it was really interesting how much variety there was in how teams select their drivers. Some teams pick them immediately after their last regional or the state tournament, whatever it might be. Some teams select their drivers literally the week before competition based on how the build and practice season has gone. Others have a very structured process. And I think it was a great conversation then. And I think it's a really good topic to revisit now. So I am not directly involved in choosing the drive team for KnightKrawler, but we have several people on the call who are. I'm just going to open the floor. Anybody want to talk about what their team does for selecting the drive team?
If no one wants to go first, I can start and talk about how 2052 does it. If people want to hear about that.
Go ahead, Mark.
All right. So for us, it's a multi-stage process. We usually begin that process right after kickoff, and we start out with a rules test to make sure that anyone interested in being on the drive team, and that includes technician and human player, has read the rules thoroughly and understands how to play the game. So that's the first hurdle, if you will, for team members to go through. So we also have an interview, not an interview, but an application. It's not an application, but we ask questions. What's your availability going to be for the season? Are you involved in other activities? Do you have a job? Will you be able to attend all of the competitions? Because that's important. If somebody wants to be on the drive team and they can't make it to a competition, that's going to be a problem. So then after the test, we usually set a cutoff based on the scores and usually get around 6 candidates above that line. Then from there, we move on to the primary driver testing, and that's usually a skills test driving a robot on an obstacle course. We'll set up cones or something and have them do an exercise that'll be similar to what we envision the game flow is going to be like. So for this year, we set up 2 lengths of carpet, so it was half of a field, just one half the long way, and set up some cones. We put tape between the cones in kind of a diamond shape and said that that's going to be the stage, and had them run cycles from one corner to the other. And then about halfway through the test, we introduced some defense. So we either put a mat on the carpet or a chair on the carpet, and put that intentionally in the primary path that they had been driving. All of our drivers seemed to pick a route that they liked, and they stuck to that until the defense was on the field. And then after that, we introduced another twist. We told them that the climber had deployed early and they can no longer go under the stage. So that limited the route that they could take. And then they did 2 cycles of that. And then we made them drive with camera feed only. I put the team flag in front of their face and shook it to distract them. And one of the things that we found was interesting was with the camera feed and field-centric driving, when you turn the robot around so you can see your way back, your left and right are now flipped. So all of the drivers took a few seconds to adapt to that change. Only one of our drivers that was tested zeroed their button. They zeroed the gyro so that facing back toward them was now away. So left and right was the correct direction. And then we timed them. We also kept track of fouls, which was if they ran into what we considered to be a solid part of the field or went off the field. And then with that, the selection was based on the time, the number of fouls, and how unflappable they were during the test. We like to look at how the driver handles changes to the strategy. They might approach the test understanding that they're going to do this one thing and do it as fast as they can, as many times as they can. And then when they have to shift in the middle of a match, which I think this game is going to be really interesting because I think you won't be able to enter a match and say, this is exactly what we're going to do, and expect that might not change. So that's how we do primary. Any questions about that? If not, I can go on to what we do for secondary and human player. All right, no questions. So for secondary, what we look at and try to focus on is communication between the primary driver and the secondary candidates. Because communication and timing is very important when they're playing together in a match. So once the primary driver has been selected, we use them and we'll come up with a game or a challenge of some sort that will test communication between the primary and the secondary candidate. Some of the things we've done in the past were have the secondary candidate wear a blindfold and do a children's puzzle with the shapes that you drop into the wood puzzle while being directed by the primary driver. That tests their communication. When we do it that way, we will have them do it one time, and then they'll have the opportunity to talk about strategies and things they could do differently for a second run, and then we'll have them do it again. Those are time-based challenges. We also look for composure under fire. We want to make sure that they're not going to freak out if things don't go their way. We don't know what we're going to do yet this year. That's something we'll come up with this week. I think this game, that adaptability is going to be important. Knowing when to score is going to be very important because if you have the opportunity to amplify and you've got a note ready to go, you might want to wait to fire that note. And then human player, this year will probably just be a ring toss competition since that's the one way that the human player can score. In past years, we've done things. I think 2015, we had people throw noodles as far as they could for the trash on the field or the litter. 2013, we did frisbees, throwing frisbees because when that game was initially introduced, human players could throw frisbees at the end, more than just the 4 for the pyramid. And that's about it. A couple other things. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Somebody has a question.
I had a question, Mark. I was just wondering how many, just out of curiosity, how many people do you typically have for primary, secondary, human player? You know, if you averaged it out, you'd have 5 people on each or 3, or does it just completely depend per year?
Are you talking about people who apply to be on the drive team?
Yeah, people
Yeah.
apply.
I think this year we had 12, 12 that have applied to be on the drive team in some aspect. When we have them fill out the form, they can say what they're interested in and what else they're willing to do. So we have some people who, and we'll ask them to rank it as well. So somebody might say, I'm interested in primary, but I'm more interested in secondary because I don't want to deal with the pressure, that sort of thing. It varies. It depends on the game sometimes.
Mark, how many people did we have that took the rules test for primary, and how many people actually got to the final stage where they were driving?
Oh, that's a good question. Mohammed would know this because he's the one who's keeping all the data this time. I think we had 14 people take the test, and the cutoff was the top 6 based on the score. So we had 6 people test for primary driver on Saturday. Any other questions for me? If not, maybe somebody else can share their experience. Or if Isaac's on the call, Isaac, do you want to talk about your experience going through the process?
Sure. Let's see. Well, I went through the primary process this year, and last year I went through the secondary process. I guess what I just want to add is that, like, there's also an aspect of, like, I guess testing how you respond, not just to change in the match, but change before the match. Like, there was not an argument, but like, this year for our test, you had to like kind of convince another team to like do amp that like wanted to do shooter because they like got that working, but you really need them to do amp. So there's kind of a GP and like a like communication skills besides in the middle of a match.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks, Isaac, for reminding me of that. Yeah, the scenario that we had was that pre-match strategy talk with the other team members of the alliance, looking at the match analysis. The candidate was going to be paired with a really good amp bot. They've been doing amp, probably the best amp bot at the competition, and we need them to do that for the match. And then they were, either I or Donovan would pretend to be from the other team and say, oh, hey, on the practice field, we got our speaker shooter working really well. We haven't had a chance to do that all regional. We want to show it off. Can we do that? And then we wanted to see how the candidate would respond to somebody doing that. Because as a drive team member, you are a representative of the team, and you will interact with a lot of other teams. And we need to make sure that people are comfortable doing that, as well as practicing gracious professionalism while they interact.
That's going to be my question. How would you respond to that in a scenario?
Well, in this particular case,
what was the expected? What kind of responses did you expect from your candidates to, how should they handle that?
That's a great question. What we had talked about before administering this was we were looking for some confidence, being understanding of the other team wanting to show off what they had accomplished, and then what we wanted to see was to see the candidate say, that's awesome that your shooter's working. We've done some scouting. We think that for us to have a chance at winning this match, we need you to do the amp. We need to be shooting because that's what our robot does. In our simulation, we said that we can't do the amp. And the third robot couldn't do the amp either. So this robot needed to do the amp. And then we also wanted them to acknowledge that if you're the best amp bot, which is what we told them, you're going to get picked because you're the best amp bot. You don't need to show off that you can do speaker at this point, because as the best amp bot, you are going to be picked by somebody. We also were looking for some flexibility. If the person said, we really need you to do amp, but we'll take a look at how the match is progressing. And if there's a chance that we can have you do that, then, we'll give you the green light and say, go ahead and do that. But it's really just to see how they interact, more than necessarily there being a right answer.
If they're the best amp bot, you probably hope they pick you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here's a question for that. You invest your whole season in being the best amp bot, and then suddenly, that doesn't pay off. I'm just throwing that one out there.
It'll be interesting to see what the different teams do. I know sometimes teams like to do everything that's possible, and some teams like to specialize. And I think that an amp bot that can retrieve notes from wherever quickly and be ready to amplify at the right time is going to be very important. That's why I'm excited for this year's game. I think that we're going to see strategies change over the course of the season. It's not going to be the same all the time from start to finish.
If I can jump in maybe with a question, I missed the beginning, but I wonder, maybe you already talked about it, but what do you do throughout the season to develop talent? Is that much of a factor?
We encourage the people who are selected for drive team to practicing driving the robot, and being very familiar. The more you do it, the more familiar with the controls you're going to be and understand the capabilities. But for people who are not selected, we do have backups. So usually we'll have a primary and a backup primary, secondary backup, as well as encouraging those people who want to drive in the future to practice. We've always said, anytime you want to come in and drive the robot, you just have to make arrangements to do that so that you can get the practice and have a better chance at succeeding next year.
And I'm sorry, yeah, I asked my question incorrectly, and I think maybe you got to it, but I was curious about off season. I said season, but the rest of the year, I was curious if there's much development that goes on.
It's really up to the students. If there's a student who's interested in driving and they say, hey, I want to drive the robot, I want to get better, I want to practice field centric, I want to practice robot centric, can somebody come in and set up the field? We'll absolutely say yes. But what we find is that doesn't happen that often.
The two times when students drive the robot the most in the off season is outreach events. So we'll take a robot and we'll demo them. And the kids that are willing to show up and do the extra time of doing a demo are the ones that often get to drive the robot. We do a big tech conference in the summer, and that's many, many hours of driving for the kids that go to that tech conference. And then this fall, we did set up 3 scheduled times during meetings where we said that this is going to be a drive practice night. Anybody who wants to practice can do that. We had to unfortunately cancel one of those, but we did have 2 of them. And then we also let, for the off-season competitions, anyone who was on the team the previous year can drive at our first off-season competition. And then if you're a brand new student, you can drive at the second off-season competition if you attended the first one, so that you saw how a competition works and you understood, the game and how to score and all that stuff. So it's not a lot. It's not like it's every week or every other week that students get an opportunity to drive, but we try to create opportunities where we can.
I can go from a small team's perspective. Both of our teams are really small. We oftentimes don't have a lot of kids that really desire to drive the robot. So what it shakes down to usually is whoever our lead build kids are that season tend to be the drivers of the robot. for one reason, they know what the robot is capable of. They know how to not break the robot, or theoretically they know that. And they probably have the most drive practice just in the shop when we're testing mechanisms and things like that. So those are the ones that generally get to operate and drive during the competition, is the ones that are there the most. I guess we're not nearly as structured, and I'd like to get more structured. I wish we could, but during off-season events, we let other kids drive, and some of them really enjoy it, and some of them are straight up say that, well, that's not for me. I can't handle that, which is totally understandable. But that's just from a small team perspective, and I don't know if you have any questions on that.
Jesse, when do you decide who's going to drive a competition? When does that decision take place?
There's not an official cutoff date or anything like that. I think for our girls, it's probably the main driver has been decided. She took over this summer and drove at our off-season competitions, and she handles it pretty well. And she is also our lead builder on the team right now. For the boys, it's a little more open. We had a driver last year, but he just hasn't been able to show up quite as much. So we might have somebody step in there, but I can't think of in my mind who that's going to be yet, because I'm not sure if the other ones are even really interested. So, we got teams of 10 kids each on each team. So there's not a lot to pick from of the ones that really want to do it. So it might narrow it down to one or two kids anyway, driver, operator type of deal.
Jesse, and we have similar situation. Right now I have 8 kids. So basically one of the initial things I asked them were, who has a better handle of video game control console system? Because if you're comfortable with Xbox 360 controller versus joystick, like flight simulator joystick, those kind of things, what is your comfort zone? Our primary driver right now is the Xbox 360, and that's one of the reasons why we're still stuck with that, is because I personally don't like them, because they don't have that much zone for tolerance, because sometimes they would stick, the little joysticks would stick, but that's what he's comfortable with using. So I don't want to change that and then throw him off. However, too, the other thing we ask the kids is who's comfortable with dealing with the pressure and the stress of being at the because it's an environment where my actions is being scrutinized by whoever, or I'm under the scope right now. And so one of the things I try to tell them is, it's just another match. Just do the best you can do, and if whatever we mess up, we'll fix it next time. But still, not every kid can handle the pressure of, oh, it was my fault. I didn't do that right. And so far, the girls have tried it. We brought the robot out in the cafeteria. It's like, everybody take a turn, drive it. Are you comfortable with it? And so most people decline pretty much, and down to the primary driver. And because we have 2 drivers, the one who drives the actual robot, and then we have a different controller for the mechanism. So the kid who does the mechanism actually prefers that. He doesn't want to drive the basic uniform shape or size, because he doesn't want to do it. So that's another thing to keep in mind too, is like the comfort level of the student for those small teams like us. It's easy to wander down to 1 or 2 kids.
Yep. And once we pick the driver, and our drivers usually are pretty consistent. They usually stick around for 3 or 4 years. Our main driver it doesn't rotate year to year very often. So once they kind of get the hang of it, we want to stick with them. And that's when we start teaching them the interpersonal skills of working with other teams and stuff like that. So they may not have that going into it, but that's what we try to urge them to get better at, and work with them to get better at during match strategy and stuff like that. Especially with a team of girls, like, it seems like other teams kind of want to push them around a little bit. And right now I got a couple pretty strong girls. I'll be like, no, that's not the best strategy based on our scouting. Like, I think we should do this. And they're pretty steadfast. They don't need a lot of backup on that, which I'm pretty proud of them for. But that's something that you kind of, especially when you have different genders in that role, you need somebody that's, especially if they're, you know, a person of color or a female or something, you know, people might just think like, what do you know? But they're in it too, and they've seen the way things work, so I have to make them feel that they deserve the respect that they do deserve when they start talking those strategy things. So
another point, Jesse, you brought up too is, and then something else too is the amount of contribution time to building the robot. I know is we base that also on our travel to qualification to go to a regional, how much hours you put in. But I also, one of the things I kind of been playing with this season is all hands on deck. If we don't have a robot programmer, well, we don't really have much of a programming team right now, but our primary driver actually is the one who's learning how to program right now. He's going through Code Academy online there. But here's the thing is like during regular practices, I tell him, you are going to be working as a builder today. And so that gives him an idea on a different mechanism on that robot and how the system should work. And also, if you work hard on the robot, you should be able to enjoy the fruit of your labor. Not some kid just kick the legs up because they can control a video game controller efficiently, and then suddenly it takes over, because they can wreck that. Going back to what Jesse said, they can wreck that, and then they may never understand the significance of how much work went into getting that done, or doing stress testing, slamming into the walls. Like, I just want to see if it breaks. Well, yeah, be careful to how you do that too, because it costs money too and time. Two things small teams don't have very much of. So,
right, and our drivers are also our lead pit crew people, typically because they are our build team people. So our drivers don't get a break between matches. They're fixing whatever happened. But they have a really firm grasp on what the machine is capable of and how to take care of it the best they can while they're out there using it.
That's interesting to hear, because from 3926's perspective, we usually have our helms person be, at least for the past couple of years that I've been on the team, our person on helms has been a captain. But for our main driver, we have strayed away from that. And there hasn't been too much interest from our leadership team in driving. But I think the other reason why we like straying away from that is because we like doing, at least this year, we've been trying to do a lot of early drive practice, and that kind of pulls people away from the things they're doing. So like, right, our CAD captain right now, or our CAD people, because we don't have necessarily a dedicated CAD captain because our leadership team got really goofy this year, is like, there's all hands on deck on CAD right now because our deadline for finishing our robot CAD was tonight. And so, that person wouldn't be able to do drive practice, but, we have, some people who are definitely looking to get into more leadership positions on the team, but, might be a sophomore, like a first year on the team, which is our driver this year. And so, for example, he'll be able to, step away for an hour or two and have the time to, do a bunch of drive practice, because we've already done, I think, 3 days worth of drive practice this season. And our goal is to try and be doing it nearly like every other day or daily if possible, as we kind of ramp into it more. Right now it's just with a drive base, but it's kind of practicing those controls and practicing getting those controls smoothly. And, can we line up with the amp really smoothly? And can we line up with the source really smoothly? Can we line up with the speaker really smoothly every time? And like, then speeding it up from there. And it's helped is we've had one of our coders, he using April tags and a camera, basically put LEDs on the robot that would turn green when it was lined up, quote unquote, and then turn red when it wasn't lined up. So it kind of gives that visual feedback of, okay, you're lined up. This is where you need to be to score in the amp or, the speaker or whatever. And then this year we had a long tryout plan, but then we didn't end up holding them because we only had one non-senior apply for our drive team, and based on how he did at mini trials, we really liked how he was driving, and because of that, we selected him to be on our drive team. Our current senior, who's been our driver for the past couple of years, decided that he wanted to step back from being a driver this year because he wanted to pass on what he's learned over the past couple of years to a non-senior driver. So that's why we decided to not have a senior be our primary driver this year.
So Ian, when did that decision take place, and was it like a captain's decision on who will be your driver?
It was I think a lot of captains, and then also in collaboration with our mentors. So our mentors have the final say on drivers, and with the planned tryouts, it was going to be the mentors who made that decision. But there was also a group leadership decision that we aren't going to have a driver be a senior this year unless there's no non-seniors who want to be drivers, in which case it would be our previous driver. And then the only person who applied, because I don't want to say we're a small team, but because we're a medium-sized team where everyone kind of knows each other really well because of being in a small school, and everyone kind of knows the tendencies of everyone, we all kind of were already leaning towards the person who did end up applying, being like, yeah, this person would be really good fit for drive team. We know that he's very level-headed, good under pressure, and will put in the hard work that's required to be on the team and be dedicated to it.
So if I can ask, Ian, is the previous driver, what's the role that person is playing now or taking?
So right now, I think there's a discussion because we've historically had an adult drive coach, and this adult drive coach is only going to be able to make our first regional this year. So we're looking at transitioning to a student drive coach. And I think we're still going to discuss who will be drive coaching at our first regional, but definitely for 10,000 Lakes, he will be the drive coach. And during a lot of the drive practice, he's kind of the one organizing the drive practice, setting up, okay, here are the drills that we're going to do. And then he'll, stop for a second and be like, so here's how I would do it, and kind of talk about, the process of how do you think about driving and how do you drive in a way that, is smooth and then also is, steady and repeatable. Because what we want to focus on a lot isn't necessarily the speed of the driving right now, but the smoothness of the driving, which means like, can we line up in one go without having to spend a couple seconds readjusting, right? Because it doesn't matter how fast you get there. If you're spending, 3 seconds readjusting, once you get to the amps, you're actually lined up. That's, not as helpful. So then we kind of try and speed it up, and then we do different things like, okay, now we're going to try just using the camera to drive, or, now we're going to try weaving through the stage during our cycles, or now we're going to put things in the way of the cycles. And right now, I mean, obviously it's just the drive base, and once we get the actual robot, things will probably change a bit, but having, that person who's able to give feedback on the driver seems to be really helpful this year.
I've only ever worked with smaller teams, so I've never really done a tryout situation myself for drive team with the students. But because it just ends up shaking out, the person who's there the most tends to want to drive and all that stuff. But I have often pushed for a secondary driver or human player, whatever, to have some. I don't like having a full senior team personally. I think Ian was kind of talking about that too, like trying to space it out a little bit so there's someone behind them who has some experience, being on the field and all that. So that does factor in, at least with the decisions that I've often been a part of for drive team, is the grade that they're in and trying to save something for the next year, if at all possible. So whether that's right or wrong, it's usually part of the discussion, at least with our teams.
But I think the good part about that, Jeremy, is that I think my school went through that with the basketball team. They have this one, and many schools probably do so. Do too. They had this one season where they had this fantastic group of basketball and boys basketball players, and but that graduating class left, and then suddenly the following seasons it took them quite a bit to get back to. And I think with FRC, we don't have. There's a way we can do that without worrying about that by trying to always have somebody coming, coming behind you 1 or 2 years, behind. So then, you always have some kind of a, like what cells do in the body before they die. They make sure they have a replacement, and the replacement must be good and have exactly the same machining that they have to be able to be efficient. Question I was going to ask following that is drive coaches. We had a unique experience at one of our off-season. It was an NMRC Open Tournament and Championship 2022, where my student drive coach was just not getting along with the primary driver, and I mean not like in the nicest way. This kid was really being flat out right rude to this girl, and he walked to me and was like, "You have to take her off the field," and I'm like, "Based on what? Tell me." Besides, and the fact is, his friend was the secondary driver, and he wanted his friend to drive. And so after that event, I just flat out told him from this going forward, I think if you're gonna get mad at anyone, I'm a teacher. I'm used to being mad at anyway. So I'm just gonna use an executive rule and put myself in that position where, if I mess up, you can get mad at me. But if a student messes up, I'm afraid that, she shouldn't get chewed out because, especially not in a professional way either. I don't know if there's a professional chewing out, but it was that scenario. So now, how do you guys handle that kind of stuff on your team? Because I don't want it to be like, oh, Mr. Miller says, and so therefore, it goes. But I like my students to have, the voice in everything we do on the team. And that was one that I pretty much just like felt like, okay, enough. And I just took that out of their hands. Like, I will take that. And I think I did have a discussion or two with you, Scott, about that. I think a while back. So I'm curious as to see how you guys would handle stuff like that.
I think one of the big things we try to do is make sure that we stop those problems before they start. So when we're, looking at who our overall drive team is going to be, we try and make sure that it's, three people whose personalities mesh pretty well together. And, albeit that we haven't really had a problem with that in the past. And obviously we've also had an adult drive coach. So that's, I think, helped in some ways, although I think there also can be negatives to having adult drive coaches. And there's been a lot of dialogue about that recently. But then also I think that, vetting ahead of time to make sure that we have, students that can work well together and that will work well together, right? Even, from the perspective of like, we will choose, someone who's, or we say we will choose, we haven't actually ever had this come up, but we've talked about choosing, someone who's a technically less proficient driver, but one that has, those better social emotional skills, who are, able to kind of do that communication better and do that in a gracious professional way where, we don't get mad at each other for making mistakes because, there is probably going to be a match we lose because our driver makes a mistake, because that happens, with every single type of activity. And, being able to accept that and, being able to, take accountability, but not get frustrated over it, and not getting frustrated at the driver over it, and saying, okay, let's learn from that, but let's also move on. And, people who are able to do that are kind of the people who we want to be in those roles.
So here's another question: how many of you guys have student drive coaches?
I see Tom raising his hand for Miller Bots. KnightKrawler has, ever since I've been on the team, this is my 9th year, we've had an adult drive coach. I don't want to wade too deep into the weeds of whether an adult is better or a student is better, but I will say for our situation, I think our adult drive coach has been a big key to our success over the years and has demonstrated an ability to keep all of the alliance calm, not just our team. That's just my perception, but that's been my observation with KnightKrawler.
If I can add, this year's student drive coach stepped back from being a driver, so she's a senior. So it's a good student-led decision, I would say, in as far as that goes. Yeah, and I wouldn't wade into that question either, Scott.
Yeah, I do want to bring up one interesting thing that I was thinking about. Now, this, I'm not saying any decisions were made, but it was a discussion that came up, and I don't know if this already brought up, but the thought of having 2 drive coaches, right? Because you have your driver, co-driver, and coach. But because something we're looking into is using a lot of April tags and make a lot of things like autonomous. It's like auto lining up for the amp and stuff like that. And so then the question is if we would need a co-driver. So something that has sort of been tossed around as an idea, and nothing has been said about this. But if our co-driver would act as sort of a like team coach, and then our actual coach would act as sort of an alliance coach. So it's an interesting idea I want to throw out there. And like I said, nothing has been formalized or anything about that. It was just the sort of after practice conversations.
Rasmus, we noticed that as well about this year's game. Is the question is what is secondary going to do? Because it seems like a lot of the tasks could be accomplished by a single person with the joystick and the right buttons. And as we're developing our test for the secondary driver this year, we've been asking what role are they going to play? And Pete and I have talked about, and Mohammed have talked about that secondary driver being sort of a team coach almost, like you said, where they'll be responsible for spotting things, paying attention to the amplifier, and free up the individual, free up Pete or whoever our coaches to manage the alliance. So yeah, we're thinking that too.
Yeah, Rasmus, that's a genius observation. I have not been part of these conversations that Mark and Pete Mohammed have been a part of, but as someone who spends a lot of time with the programming team as we get closer to competition, doing autos and stuff, I think your suggestion is a really, really great one of having a second set of eyes, especially with as fast as this game is going to move this year, having someone trying to look ahead that's shoulder to shoulder with the primary driver. I really like that suggestion a lot.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to bring up with that is that the amplification plays a really interesting role for coaching here. And if you want to coach to sort of like talk to that human player, because I forget exactly how the ruling is, but if I remember correctly, there's like a coach box that can is fairly close to the human player for the amp. And so you might be able to do some sort of communication there for when to amp. But I don't know how that would work out.
I get a little nervous about guaranteeing an alliance coach, just with the other 2 teams. I'd be nervous about, forcing on other teams who might not be interested, or how the personality dynamics of that might go when you go up for the strategy discussion before the match and you say, oh, here's our alliance coach. I'm sure that's a great idea. I'd be curious about the wording of that and how that would sound to the two other drive teams that you're meeting with.
And sorry, Mark.
That's all right. Go ahead.
And thank you, Jeremy, for actually, because I was wondering how to say that. We had a couple incidences at GNR last year where, I'm very temperamentally very low at these events. And there was one point where I literally almost after the game went up to a team and almost told the adult coach, like, calm down, but I didn't, because I think when you some people sometimes get a little hot head and screaming and why are you doing that? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't help the kid when you're doing that, really, And so there were a couple of times that happened on our alliance where they weren't yelling at my kid necessarily, but it didn't matter if it was at my kid or another kid. When an adult starts to yell and your volume is loud, these are kids, and so like you're saying, if I go and say, hey, I'm the the alliance, coach, and someone who's had an experience like I did, I'll be like, red flag would be start going. I'm like, how do you handle that, cooperation or cooperation and any of that gracious professionalism right there is like, what makes you the drive coach, the alliance coach started about that. So, but like where's Rasmus is coming from, it makes sense to, to kind of like, because we've had it where Ryan Swanson was fantastic in last year, Lake Superior, where he was floating between and kind of like things that we wouldn't see. And, but it has to be a level-headed person who cannot excite kids in the wrong direction, but kind of calm the nerves a little bit. The nerves they're going to be flying regardless. We don't need somebody to add a torch to the blazing fire already. That's
Rasmus, is that what you meant when you said alliance coach? Like you would try to coach all three teams? Because when you said that, I took that to mean the secondary driver acts like a coach for your driver to help them navigate the field, and then your coach that stands behind is trying to coordinate with the other coaches to say, are we going to try to get an amplification and score notes at the same time on the speaker? So when you said that, I was taking that from the point of view of one coach coordinates between isn't in charge, but coordinates between the alliances, saying, are we going for a double amplification, or did you really mean someone sets up as a coach to coach the entire alliance?
Yeah, I was definitely meaning more as a coordinator. I think as drive team, I don't think you want to step on anyone's toes, and so I definitely want to avoid that. I think also if that is a role that teams choose, I think you need to be very careful of who goes in that role, because I definitely hear that about having not great experiences with coaches. I think you definitely want someone that can definitely work with everyone well.
Thank you. That really makes a lot of sense saying that, because say, hey, we got 30 seconds. What's the plan? Because again, like you're saying, we lost 2 critical matches at GNR because the alliance could not really. I tell my kids, you stick to the plan set before the match unless you otherwise told. But when the other 2 teams, when people are doing something different and all of a sudden, like, hey, we're going to do triple climb, but no one's doing a triple climb, and then it becomes like all for yourself and, one for all type mentality. But having that communication going between, what's your plan? What's happening? We have 1 minute left. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think it'll be really intriguing to hear the stories that come back from behind the driver wall with how that goes this year, because there's going to be things like, we want to try to get a double amplification score, but our only robot that can score in the trap, you guys got to score in the amp because you got to have enough time to score in the trap. We'll go get the notes to score in the speaker. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of that type of stuff of last minute sort of switching roles to accomplish the goal. Maybe somebody has a note and the other 2 people are still down the field, but they're coming back. normally somebody might shoot in the speaker, might say, I'll go get it in the amp so it can be amplified when the other two come back. I feel like there's going to be a lot of that situational stuff where the coaches are going to have to talk to each other a whole lot more than in previous years. I think there's going to be less of this is our plan at the start of the match and more of this is our plan in the next 10 seconds.
And then communicate with the human player who's going to be ready to hit the button. Whoever's on the end of that has to be able to let that person know what's going on. So I totally agree.
That's driver station 3. I think driver station 3 is going to be the hardest spot to be in. It's got the most obstructed view to picking up field elements from your source. It's separated from the other 2 driver stations, and you have to sort of be the relay for the human player as a coach there too, if you need to instruct your human players.
Get out of my head, Scott Davis, because that was going to be a question I was going to ask. Who's going to take? How do you end up in that spot versus I know there's some things that if you have a really whichever robot is the best scoring robot on that alliance, probably one of the best spot possible. But then when it comes down to it, it's like who gets put in that spot there, and
I think that's going to be really interesting of the negotiations for the human player spot. And part of me is almost like, do we need to scout each team's human players to see how well they are at the ring toss, right? Because that's going to be a nightmare because, you're going to have to basically guess based on team shirts what team is doing the ring toss in each match, which is, a bit of a nightmare. But then also from the perspective of the person who does the ring toss also has to be able to work with the alliances to know when to amplify. And, if you have another team where, you think that they amplify at bad times, but you think they can get the ring toss, right? And how does that impact everything? And our team decided, we want to be in that position every single time. That means we have to be able to nail the ring toss every single time. And so far, we're still finding someone who can do it consistently. Because right now, I'm the most consistent person on my team, which is very scary as someone who does not want to be a human player, but can get it 1 out of 5 times as an unathletic person. And so I think that, as we go into the season, that person's also going to need to know, gameplay strategy, because I think the goal is that if the person knows the game well enough, they can independently make the decision to amplify and, kind of know, okay, there's 2 notes in the amp. Everyone's loaded up. The first note has been shot, right? You have 1.5 seconds after it goes into the speaker to press that amplify button. And they want to press it as late as they can while not missing that one score, right? And so doing all of those things, I think, if you can train someone to do that independently, that's going to save a lot of work for everyone else. But then, the question is, are you choosing someone who can make those on-the-fly decisions, or are you choosing someone who can do the ring toss? Or are you, what if you're designing a robot to pick up from the source? If you're picking up from the source, that means you're going to need your human player at the source, which means you aren't going to be able to do the ring toss, right? And so it's all of these questions that kind of come back to that one spot at the human player station.
I will share that I have made a official request to the person who sets up the practice field at our competitions to have a dedicated space for practicing the ring toss. And I would like to propose that the 3 alliance human players go over, they each throw 3 rings, and whoever does the best is the tosser. I would like to have that option at competition of saying, hey, if we have 2 or even 3 people who think they're the better at scoring on the microphone, okay, fine, let's go over to the practice field, let's do a throw off, and whoever's the best throwers in the next match. I don't have a problem letting whoever, under the stress of the moment of 2 out of 3, you got 3 tosses, I don't have a problem with letting them have a throw off. I just hope there's a place to do that on the practice field at competitions. That would be really nice.
I would hope actually that it's not that they have a separate ring toss area, so that way it's not tied up by the robots.
Yeah, I should have been more clear. Yeah, not throwing over top of robots that are trying to climb in the chain, but
why don't we just bring it up to Duluth? I mean, seriously,
as long as we have
pole.
as long as you have an official place to do it.
Yeah,
we got yelled at. We got very politely told to go back to our pits because we had game elements flying in the air in a non-sanctioned place for game elements to be flying in the air. So, I mean, you have to have a place to do it. And I made that, as I said, an unofficial request of someone who has
Well,
to do that.
as the team that will be setting up the practice field in LSR, I'm easily bribed.
Which one's LSR?
How many notes is that, David? What's the bribe rate going right now for number of notes?
Oh, I don't need notes. I licorice.
Even cheaper.
Which
at least licorice you can
LSR?
buy.
Oh, Lake Superior.
Lake Superior, but I believe it's there. It may be end up being a shared field again this year. We'll have a full field there, but it may be a shared with Northern Lights.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if they could just have a separate area to do the ring toss, it would. I think every team would appreciate that.
Yeah.
I have
think
no.
that would.
I'm sorry.
No, you can go.
I have no. That's interesting. The idea of having a ring toss area. I want to. You don't have to answer this, Westerberg, but just because you can be bribed, does it have any value? Anyhow. 3 ring tosses, that's kind of a small sample set. I guess you can't ask people to keep track of their score over time, but doesn't that seem like a more valuable thing than 3, a minimum of 3 kind of thing? I don't know.
But I think what Scott probably was going to, if you can toss under the duress, on a duress and get it, even 1 out of 3, then, well, you are already there. But if I'm at home at my school and I'm doing consistently 1 out of 5 or 2 out of 5, well, you don't have that. My kid called it the shell, the PTSD signal going off, going off, and then your heart rate start going and all that stuff. So being at the event center and actually having your alliance right there, say, okay, you, Ian, got 3 shots, and you, Jeremy, got 3, and he's like, okay, all eyes on me now, that's different. So, and that's going to be similar to what's going to be out there when you actually having a competition. So maybe if I understood Scott correctly, that's probably why he, why 3 out, 3, and so you don't have that much time to say, oh, do 10 or 5, just so our numbers is always good.
I think it's great to sorry, Scott. I think it's great to have a practice area. Don't get me wrong about that, but you guys know statistics, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
My whole thought process is it's got to be something that can be done relatively quickly. If you can determine it by scouting, awesome, do that. But you'll get 3 rings in the real competition. You throw 3 rings. I don't know about you guys, but I have thrown maybe 20 rings from the official distance to the official set of microphones. And I've thrown 20, maybe 20 total. And I feel like if you're practicing every night or every other night, scoring 1 out of 3 is a fairly realistic thing. It's going to be like shooting free throws. So hopefully 3 shots is enough for you to be able to score 1 or even 2 to get a shot to be the human player in a match. Maybe that's not realistic. I don't know, but that's just my feeling at the moment. I might change my mind in the next 5 weeks.
I like the 3 shots idea just because I think that putting people under pressure. So I'm horrible under pressure. So like the moment people watch me do it, it's 0% accuracy. But I also think that pressure on the human players this year is kind of insane because like I think in 2022 when you had the human player shot, right, it was at the beginning of the match, so you kind of just tried your best, but this year, right? Like if it's a close match, right? Past 2 years we've had Einstein matches where it's 1 by 1 point, right? Both 2022 and 2023, and like you can imagine the stress because there are going to be regionals that are won and lost by whether or not a human can toss a ring on that microphone. There's going to be, my bet for the season is champs is going to be decided on a missed ring. And I think that, even just the ranking points of, do we rank first or do we rank second, right? And, or, this match is really close and I have to get the second ring on to be able to win it, right? Those types of situations are going to be, incredibly stressful. And so it's not just being able to consistently do that shot. It's almost being able to block out the match and everything else that's going on and do the shot. Like at first we were joking, like to instruct our human player to not even look at the scoreboard before doing the shot. But then you realize, but they have to be in tune to what the rest of the game is going on because they have to be doing amplification, right? So it's not that like they won't know whether or not the match will be decided by the throw. And because of that, I think it almost makes it, even more difficult.
Speaking of in terms of the human player too, another big factor is a person who response time is quick. I seen and also decisive about. I think Ian, you must have touched on that a little bit about when to push the amplification button, and so forth, because it's no good to your alliance to push that button when there is no shooters with with notes ready to go, because it's just 10 seconds. By the time they go across and grab it and come back, it just doesn't work. So maybe I don't know what the communication will be like. Hey, if you're an amplification robot, until we have game pieces ready to go, just grab the game pieces and bring it closer to your station and put it there. Or maybe one robot bring game pieces to amplify while one robot shoots. I don't know, whatever alliances we'll be talking about. It'll be quite interesting to hear what will happen or what's going to evolve after week 1 and week 2. Really like to see, is it going to be 2 shooters and 1 amplification, or one runner, 1 shooter, 1 amplification? I don't know. But that human player has to be very careful about, be mindful about timing to, as to when push that green button to, make it count.
Does anybody have any other topics related to driving, picking your drivers, practice driving? Otherwise, if we want to, well, let's make sure that this topic is closed before I talk about anything else. Anyone have anything else they want to chat about? Our conversation seems to be slowing down, but if somebody's got something you've been holding in their pocket, pull it out now, please.
So is everybody going to be trying to shoot into the trap?
We are hoping that turns out to be an option and we don't actually have to build our trap mechanism. But until our shooter is mounted on a robot and we've had enough time to practice, we're still planning to build a trap mechanism.
Our team made the determination that for our perspective, doing the trap mechanism wasn't going to be a great use of our time, because we wanted to focus more on getting the robot done quick. And driver practice, we guessed that like it'd take an extra week to get the trap mechanism working. So we said we'll spend that time with driver practice, and based on hopefully being able to train in a human player that's consistent, which we've been doing human player practice as much as we've been doing drive practice, right? We're hoping that makes it so getting that climbing ranking point is going to be able to happen with or without the trap, because then you just need a double climb and a spotlight, and that's not terrible, and I don't think it'll be as consistent as if you have a trap, but we're also looking at, because there's an April tag right there, right? If we're able to use the April tag to line up to a set distance, at a set angle shooting, at a set speed shooting, and able to dial that in consistently, we're looking into doing that. But we're not expecting it to work. But we are kind of designing a robot with, we have variable angle designed into it because we're doing an unqualified quokkas like arm, but with an internal intake. That is a packaging nightmare. And so that should hopefully be helpful.
I think Lauren said something about that last meeting, the roundtable. The time that it would take for you to probably maneuver your way to opening the trap, scoring in there, you could have probably gotten 2 or 3 game pieces in the speaker, in that time. So maybe that might be something to consider if you really want to pursue that. But I'm also eager to see what other teams do after week 1 and week 2 because I have the matches on usually in my classroom in my secondary screen. So I'm curious as to see what people will actually do, because obviously this is just a small sample size of the Minnesota, regional, so.
Is there any videos out there of anybody doing the trap successfully? Because I haven't seen any.
I haven't seen any yet. I've been one team try. Actually, if you look up to YouTube Fun had they had a top RI3D videos, and the first one they show they didn't really have a robot, but part of that was they had heavily invested a time in trying to do a trap, and so it really didn't pay off. And they've made some suggestion, but nothing quantifiable that you can see to materialize into a robot.
There have been some videos on Chief Delphi and stuff of teams shooting into the trap, and some have like 1 in 10 chances of getting in, some have like 80%. It's just a lot of it is they're doing it with a prototype often or a very rough design. And so right now they're not necessarily like the most accurate in terms of what realistically will be, if it realistically be feasible, but there have been teams that have at least been able to shoot into it.
I also wonder if there's going to be a rule update that prevents shooting into the trap if First HQ deems it kind of.
They did actually, in one of the like Q&A questions, say that you don't have to be on the chain to score in the trap, which basically the only way to do that besides a jumping robot is to shoot it. So
and I think that as of right now, I don't think they'll change it, but come week 0 and they get scared by all the trap shooters, they might. That would be a really unfortunate 2012 side climb repeated incident where people design their robots around one thing that they think will work for the end game, and then there's just like, nope, that isn't going to work. So I'd hope that if First is planning on doing that, they do that sooner rather than later. But we'll see.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. Would it be legal if, let's say, you were on an alliance and one robot can actually open the trap and then another shoot in there? Would that, count?
And the way the rules are written now, that would count.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it would be unfortunately late if they changed the rules to disallow that. I remember Power Up, so 2018, where we were looking at doing a buddy climb to lift another robot and climb, and then we realized that if you drop down to the carpet while you're sitting on the platform, that violates the bumper rules. And so we designed a robot not to do that. And then in week 2, after some lobbying, I'll say, maybe that's not true, First released a rules update that said that a buddy climber wouldn't violate the bumper rules. And we had already, threw that out because it broke the rules and had moved in a different direction. So I hope that doesn't happen again, because I hope that we're not fundamentally redirecting design this late in the game because of a rules change. So we'll see. I think KnightKrawler, at our last design meeting, we decided that we were planning to hand off the robot to programming team prior to having a trap mechanism built. So we were going to try to sneak in, testing on the robot between times when programmers need the robot. If we were able to get a trap mechanism built, it would probably happen very late in the game.
For me, if you talk about shooting into the trap, my biggest concern is performance difference between the official game elements and the team versions that everyone's playing with right now. We've seen differences in that impact teams over multiple years in multiple different ways. And that certainly could be the case here as well.
Are there any practice fields that have ordered the Andy Mark official trap thing for $512?
The Arrowhead Regional Planning, or the Arrowhead Regional Coalition has ordered 2 of them. And from years past, we have enough of the aluminum trusses that we will be setting up field accurate stages, traps, and microphones.
Okay, cool. So will we, but that's not next week probably. It's a couple weeks out. But yeah, we got the same thing going. So.
At the field will pretty much be set up at East High School next weekend for any teams that are wanting to compete or to practice or whatever you want to do. Just get a hold of Doug Frisk if you've got his email. If not, get a hold of me and I can get it to you. And if you want to come practice on as accurate of a field as we can possibly put together in the high school, come on up.
Is that just next weekend, or is that starting next weekend and good throughout the entire build season?
Next weekend it is going to be at East. Let me find out what it is. Trying to find his schedule that he just emailed out. I know the weekend before the double decker, it's going to be at ESCO. It will be at East, Build Week 3, Silver Bay the week after that, Hermantown Week 5. It'll be over at the Community College in Grand Rapids Week 6, and then at ESCO the weekend before the double decker.
Very good, thank you.
I have a question about shooting notes. Has anyone attempted to shoot a note that has been broken and taped back together? In the event that that's actually the field elements we're playing with by week 4, 5, and 6?
From what I've read on Delphi, it's not good. Not similar at all. But that's not firsthand experience.
What about Roseville? I heard Roseville sacrificed a note and broke it in half. Fire Bears? I will say that KnightKrawler has one broken note, sort of mostly partially broken. It is taped together because it is on the verge of being a straight line rather than a circle. And
I don't believe I don't think we've broken one yet. Our one that we've been using for practicing for the humans is greatly scuffed up.
Mm.
A lot of the outer coating is off, divots in it. But from everything I've seen, you can pick it up in the acquisition, but they don't shoot, because as soon as no matter top, bottom, or side, it's just gonna fall apart.
Well, we've got one that's got tape on it because it's on the verge of breaking. I would say if you were to fold the noodle in half, there would be maybe 20% of it still attached and the rest opens. So that gives you an idea of how broken it is. We taped that up with gaffer's tape, and we found that the more compression you have in your shooting wheels, and we have top-bottom shooting wheels in our current prototype, the more compression you have on the wheels, the worse it is. So if you lose up the compression, it seems to be more consistent with bad notes.
When you say compression, are you talking
How
the
much
thin
your
distance?
Yeah, so if you got your top and bottom wheels, how close those things are together.
Okay.
If you have a vertical wheeled shooter, the tighter that is, the worse it is for damaged notes. Now,
Sure.
granted, that's like 15 minutes of testing, but it was something that we noticed with our one bad note that was taped, is that it seemed to be more consistent if you had less compression. Now, less compression might not be any good for all the other things you want to do, but it is something we noticed.
Interesting. We're working on printing out. We're gonna print out the 3D mold pieces, or the mold pieces, and try to actually make some.
We have them all printed. We don't know what kind of foam to use. We haven't found a consensus on Chief Delphi unless someone here knows.
Well, I think that the foam flex, but you got to put color in it, because if you don't put the color in it, because the color will change its properties.
Okay. Foam flex with color.
I got a question. Sorry.
Okay.
I got a question here that may not be as valuable. I was thinking, first it's all about sustainability and then all these different things. How in Uncle Sam's names are all these broken notes going to be disposed of properly? I'm just curious.
The students take them home with them, and they keep them for a while until they deem that they're bored with them, and they throw them away.
Until they eventually end up in the landfill?
I'm sure they will.
Right along with all the buttons the students get in the pits.
Andy Burke's going to use this packing material.
Thanks, Ian.
Ian, you are not old enough for a frisbee or a basketball.
Yeah, you forgot the big tennis ball, Ian.
Oh, I'm sure he has it. Actually, I know of several alumni that have filled elements that they've made into stuff that are actually pretty cool.
David, I put in the chat, hey, man, you are good.
That is service. Wow. Very fast. All right. Any final topics here? I think we can wrap it up a few minutes early. If there's anything else that people want to chat about, otherwise we can sign off. I will say that next week, so I talked to, dang it, I should have had this up already. So let me go get the topic, future topics. Next week, sign up to host. Oh, Lexi, it looks like Lexi has already updated this. Okay. So next week is the 28th. There we go. And Andy had originally signed up for February 11th to give his talk on April tags. I messaged him today and said, hey, did you realize that's the Super Bowl? And he said no. So we moved that to next week. So we're going to be talking about April tags on January 28th, and that'll be our topic for January 28th. I'm going to cancel the meeting for February 11th because even if you don't like football, there's a good chance you like commercials. So we'll probably, I think we'll just plan not to have a roundtable on Super Bowl Sunday. And that leaves us with February 18th, and that slot is currently open, as well as the 25th, the weekend after that. So if anyone actually is the 25th, that is our week 0. We'll have to play that by ear for the 25th. Hopefully we'll have the entire thing torn down and we'll be home by then. Either way, next week's going to be April tags, and we have an open slot for February 18th if anyone has any topic suggestions and they want to host the discussion. Anything else before we call it an evening? All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.